Spin it again.
It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena.
You know what, I've heard people call, and I kind of like it, the era that we're in, the post-truth kind of era.
And lately there's been a lot of coverage in the real news about the growing and booming business of creating fake news.
Well, I don't know, maybe he was watching CNN fake news. What do you think?
You are fake news.
Sir.
Go ahead.
Let us return to the fight. This battle is far from over.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Real News Live in the Morning. My name is Mr. Henry. This is a Tuesday morning. What's the date right now? Let me check the digital watch. That's right, it's 4:21. We totally missed that yesterday. Moving on quickly. Yeah, that's right. We just skipped it on purpose. That's right. Mr. David Shine Thompson catching me on that. Shine, buddy. How you doing this morning? Before we get to our fantastic guest, you can see this. Sure, I think you're still muted on your end. Shine, how you doing this morning, buddy? It's a new take. Yeah. And obviously, you'll see in the other section of the screen right now, Miss Sherry Voluntary. How you doing? Looking lovely this morning. What have you been up to?
Thank you. I'm great. Hunkered down in the bunker, all that. Not really.
We definitely want to have Miss Sherry Voluntary on today in today's program. An individual who needs no introduction on this program in particular, but has been a little while since we've had you back on, and I think it's quite pertinent that we brought you on today, especially with what Shine talked about just a second ago. Obviously, the major headline today is that, look, man, we're opening the economy back up, at least as far as May 1st is concerned. Some stuff even coming as early as April 27th. Before we get into that, though, let me hit the show notes here real quick, and in the comment section, got a few people watching Facebook right now. Let us know. Greatest audience in the nation appreciation segment. Let us know how you've been. What have you been up to? What do you need help with? Prayer requests, prayer concerns, encouragement, anything you got you want to give a shout out for. Life going well, life not going well. Let's build this community, help each other through this type of thing. If you have any businesses you out there that are trying to survive, that are innovating, that would like to innovate, that need some ideas, bring them to our attention. We'll put them on the program, all that kind of stuff. So Judy, Kelly, Zach's out on Facebook as well. Sherry, we're already getting some of your folks over there. And before we move too far forward here, Sherry, as I'm giving some people some time to respond to the greatest audience in the nation appreciation segment here, for those of the Real News audience that may not have had a full introduction into the world of the Sherry Voluntary, give a quick sort of 30-second rundown synopsis as to what is the political ideology of a Sherry Voluntary? What is voluntary? Definitely tell us that.
Okay. Yeah, you guys can find me. I'm sorry, I had the volume up on my phone. I thought I turned it down. You can find me on Facebook. I'm generally always there. Twitter, Instagram, all that. I am on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called The Sherry Voluntary Show. I'm not really putting out new shows right now. But I do put up my interviews. I've got a backlog I need to get up on there. So this show will go up if you're okay with that. And that's always great. But you can find me on Facebook is probably the best one. And so voluntarism is the idea that all human interaction should be voluntary and not coerced in any manner. So either physically by violence or by hardcore manipulation, as far as we'll do this to you if you don't do this, what we want, which is I'm also a libertarian. So I believe in the non-aggression principle, which means that the only ethical use of violence is defensive and never aggressive. And I believe in complete property rights, which means complete self-ownership, because you are your first property, and that you have the right to do with your property as you wish, as long as that does not involve harming others.
Sure. This is one of the reasons why I always love to have you, especially when we were doing the radio program back in the day. We always used to love to have you on because so much of your rhetoric, your framework, your worldview harkens back to what a lot of conservatives like to say is sort of this precepts of the founding fathers, right? Especially the property that you're talking about. Because obviously we all know that it used to, that the phrasing was life, liberty, property. It was changed pursuit of happiness because that made more sense to more people. But property itself, property rights, underlying Fourth Amendment, is sort of the foundation of our constitutional republic, right? And that's where a lot of your
What they say.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. I mean, in my worldview, the revolution was a revolution, and the Constitution was a counter-revolution to that, because that's centralized power, and centralized power always leads to where we are now. It's you can look through history. That's the way it goes. So, I mean, it's nice to have those human rights laid out in writing, and of course, that's not all of them. It's the Constitution even says. But yeah, I like to tell my Republican friends that all that stuff they talk about, I actually believe. They abandon their principles as soon as something comes along that they don't like. So,
well, like anything.
Well, it's an interesting day to have a volunteerist on, or someone who, is little L libertarian, philosophically libertarian, on a day when we kind of went from the most authoritarianism that our society has ever accepted in a period of time ever in America, in a non-war period, probably. Don't want to be too hyperbolic, but it's at least the most authoritarian situation I've ever been in my life, anecdotally, the most authoritarian situation I've ever been in. Yeah. And we're released from that today. Or, we've heard that we're going to be released in 10 days, right? Because it's the 30th of April when this is happening. Right. So, Grant, we should probably spend some time setting the table. Anybody who didn't hear the governor's announcement yesterday, we should break that down. I think that I just mentioned the first time on the show when the restrictions are going to be relaxed, but we should get all that information out there before we start discussing it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you'll see, by the way, at the top of the show notes here this morning in the description section, directly underneath the title of this video, there's a link to an Evernote article, evernote.com. That goes to a much better formatted version of the show notes, if you will. You can actually read it, is the point I'm making, if you want to follow along with what we're talking about this morning. But this is directly from the governor's website himself, and not himself, sorry. It's from the Tennessee government's website, is what I meant to say. Here's the headline, though. Governor Lee announces safer at home order will expire on April 30th. We have video clips in the show notes if you want to watch yourself. Maybe we'll get to those. Here it is in a quick nutshell, though. Governor Bill Lee announced for the order for Tennesseans to remain at home will expire on April 30th, with the vast majority of businesses in the 89 counties allowed to reopen on May 1st. He said, quote, "Our economic recovery group is working with industry leaders around the clock so that some businesses can open as early as soon as Monday, April 27th. This coming Monday," he says, "we're working around the clock to make sure that some businesses can open that early. These businesses will open according to specific guidance that we will provide in accordance with state and national experts in both medicine and business." Now, the Lee administration will work with Shelby, Madison, Davidson, Hamilton, Knox, and Sullivan counties and their health departments as they plan their own reopening strategies. Now, we talked about this before, Shine. Quick breakdown here. The reason for those specifically mentioned counties, I presume, those are the specifically mentioned counties whose health departments can actually issue some of these orders. So some of these things have to come through those county health departments. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's the places that have county health departments or municipal health departments too, right? It's not just...
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why, when I tried to explain this before, as far as Governor Lee's hand being forced, if you will, by some of these statewide orders, it's simply in some sense because certain counties do not have the ability or capacity or allowance, whatever you want to say, to issue some of these orders. Going on, he says, "While I'm not extending the safer at home order past the end of April, we are working directly with our major metropolitan areas to ensure that they are in position to reopen as soon and as safely as possible. Social distancing works," he says. "And as we open our economy, will be more important than ever to keep social distancing as our lives and livelihoods depend on it." Finalizing this statement by saying, "The Economic Recovery Group, composed of 30 leaders from the public and private sector, is crafting guidance to assist businesses in safely reopening. The industry representatives participating in the ERG collectively represent over 140,000 Tennessean businesses that employ 2.5 million Tennesseans. You can find more information about the entirety of all what I just went through at the bottom of that link in the show notes this morning. But there it is, dude. In a quick nutshell, Sherry, I'll kick it to you for a little bit of response if you want to. Look, we're now here. I will say my quick take on this. We've had these 2-week phased rollouts, 2 weeks here, pause, 2 weeks here, pause, 2 weeks more, right? To his credit, and I don't know, I'm going to be completely honest here, okay? I said yesterday, Shine, did I not? If I had to recant for the possibility of a reason for the protest taking yesterday, I didn't necessarily understand the reasoning why. Why are you hitting this 10 days in advance? This is a little bit of Mr. Henry recanting right here. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe those protests had something to do with Bill Lee coming out and making this statement today. Maybe he knew about it. Maybe it was influenced. Maybe it had nothing to do with it at all. But I'll at least recant to the extent of I didn't really see the purpose behind it. Frankly, Shine, I wanted to come on here yesterday and say it felt a little bit too quickly organized, dare I say, staged for me to get behind. I was slightly worried about maybe some caustic intentions behind that. Like somebody had sort of commandeered that whole movement. You get what I'm saying? It felt
well, in
weird.
A time like now, you should always, I mean, in a time where everything's in flux and you got so many people hungry, their lives are disrupted and things like that, you have to be suspect of movements that arise in crazy situations. So yeah, because you never know where they're going to go. And I think we said that on the show. It's the free TN protest now. A week later, it could be the free TN riot, and you wouldn't want to be associated with it if it was the free TN riot. But I'm sorry, Sherry, I want to hear your thought. Oh golly, I'm knocking everything down. But I want to hear Sherry's thoughts.
First of all, I'd like to say if the Republicans in this state had any credibility whatsoever, Bill Lee would be being removed from office right now because he used your cell phone data to track you against the Fourth, Amendment. Like, do you care about the Constitution or not? That's what y'all talk about. So let's get on it. Let's get on start holding these people accountable, whether they have a little R, a little D, or a little I next to their name. The credibility is an issue with me. That aside. Viruses don't operate on a schedule. They operate in a certain curve, and that's what normally happens. But just because the government says you can go back to work now, it's safe. Like what's wrong with you people that you think that they can just tell you when you're safe and you're not? Your safety is always your responsibility. And this is why we didn't need a quarantine in the first friggin' place, because if there's a real threat to people's lives and they know it, they're incentivized more than anyone else, more than the nanny government that claims to love you more than you love yourself, to do the things that you need to do. So like washing your hands and staying distant, whatever. This whole thing has been, if you look at just the numbers, it's as of a week ago, it was no necessarily worse than regular flu seasons. So I have a lot of information about that running through my head, but the cost of this whole killing of the economy, really, like you have in Knox County alone, 189 people tested positive, 41 active cases as of Friday, 144 recovered. It's not killing everybody, y'all. 21 hospitalized and 4 deaths. Now, take it for what happened with the economy. 325 people in Tennessee have lost their jobs. I don't know about the specifics for Knox County, but we've had 12 suicides that I know of so far in this period. So tell me which one you think is worse. Like, people, you're not too stupid to take care of yourselves. You don't need them to tell you this. There are hot spots where this has spread more possibly, but this is not one of them. And if you're within a certain age range, you're good. So I think that, people are letting fear guide them, and these false numbers, like, I guess we'll get into that later. I think you were maybe going to talk about that, but there's some of the inflated numbers, and this is, they maybe didn't set up the virus, but they certainly have taken advantage of every aspect of it that they can to grab power. So we need to remember, and that these protests, as sympathetic as I am with people, and I do want the economy opened back up, look, that's an appeal to authority. You want businesses to open back up, then by God, go down and do business with the businesses. You don't have to appeal to these authoritarians. They do not need to control you. You don't need to be told what to do. you know there's not a risk to you. If you are immunocompromised, stay home. That's what you should do every flu season. Like, this is the thing. This worldwide, this has not killed as many people as the regular flu.
See, this is why I like having Sherry on, because she puts meat on the bones of what Mr. Henry pretends to espouse every single morning. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it is a little bit of in an ideal world. I would like to see things done this way. And Sherry says, just do them that way.
For the past 3 or 4 weeks, we have been skeptical the whole time we've been on the air. But at the same time, we wanted to be measured. We wanted to be responsible because we didn't want to encourage anybody to do things that could harm themselves. Because and mostly because we have authoritarian systems like the CCP. The ultimate in authoritarian systems in the world, not doing what authoritarian systems do best and not sharing information, not being truthful, not being honest. And because they were not
hiding it.
Yeah, and we're just finding out more and more that China's been on somewhat of a digital war footing with this, really trying to harm us. That information comes out more and more. But as we actually figure things out, though, and move from the phase of we don't know, we should be careful, to, millions of people have been exposed probably. And we have, unfortunately, I don't want to downplay it too much, but 40,000 deaths. But that's not 100,000. That's not 500,000, which is what they were saying, which makes some of these moves that the states are doing look responsible. And also, hey, Grant, let's go ahead and catch some comments, because we're getting so many comments, including stuff saying thank you to Sherry for joining us today. They're actually, Sherry, they're actually telling us, I told you when we first started that you needed to turn down just a little bit. But it sounds like you could probably go back to that screen and turn yourself up just a little bit more.
Actually, just click that button that says automatically adjust volume. That'll take care of it. It's automatic. You and I are both set on that too. If you same thing you had before, Sherry, pull up your audio settings where that same tab and just click the one button, you'll be good to go.
So sorry about that, folks. We're learning every day how to do this show a little bit better. And every day, and this is our first time having someone else on besides us. I'm sure
is that better?
So I'm sure it's perfect. But is anyone else?
Can I say something
go ahead,
to what you had said, Shine? Absolutely, people should be cautious, because I believe in radical freedom, but the other side of the radical freedom coin is radical personal responsibility. We have a crisis of that in our world. And so you should be personally responsible. My parents, my mom has diabetes and high blood pressure. My grandmother, who lives with them, has kidney failure and diabetes. I haven't been to see them because I don't want to put them in jeopardy. They are at risk, but they're at the same risk as they are every single flu season. This is no different risk. This has been the corporate media is not your friend, and they are in bed with the corporate state, and they have an agenda that they are pushing and a narrative. And I don't claim to know what the ends are except for taking more power, but we have to stop believing everything that we're fed by the corporate media. They are not your friend, and they're not there to give you the information that you need. You have to be more savvy. If you want freedom, then you have to be more savvy, because freedom and safety are not synonyms, and it's your job to protect your freedom. So this is where we've got to be. People have to step up and say, okay, am I actually at risk? And the social distance, like staying 6 feet apart, whatever, that's okay, fine. If that's what makes you feel comfortable and you need to do, then do that. Like, I'm not suggesting that people be reckless. What I'm suggesting is that you don't have to lock yourselves down. You don't have to hoard 7,000 rolls of toilet paper. Like, we have basically ruined the economy, and people are suffering way worse from the jobs that they've lost and will lose. And the infrastructure of this country is sadly, like, it was already, they talk about it being brittle now. It was already brittle. I have friends in that industry that said it was already like not in a good situation. This is a really bad place that we're in. I think we have not seen the worst of the economic fallout.
Well, and Eric just said on Facebook a second ago, he said, and I would put money on the opposers of this movement. What he means by the opposers of this movement is referencing that the protests that were happening all across the country yesterday, in Nashville in particular, is what we covered in Tennessee. He said, I put money on the opposers of this movement attempting to hijack it as well. The ones calling for the stay-at-home order, aggressively attacking the protesters, wishing sickness and death upon them. He said, for sure, there's at least one of them trying to undermine this movement. What do y'all think? That honestly, that's a little bit why I brought that up before, of something. it sort of is a guttural feeling. I have no other way to explain this either anecdotally or by way of actual evidence, but just a simple guttural feeling, hearkening back to like the Tea Party days. Okay, I saw how easy it was for a lot of people to commandeer some of those movements, and that was, you're decades ago then. Okay, the sophistication with which someone is able to take over these movements or supplant some nefarious element in there, or I don't know, man, gin up some created, fabricated type feeling or something. Okay, here's what I'm saying is, if I'm out there and if I wanted to, I don't know, some type of sabotage. If I wanted to sabotage this movement, I'd go out there, rile a bunch of people up, get 200 to 300 people together, get them hugging and kissing on camera. Now all of a sudden I can go to a local news site over here and say, look, they're spreading the coronavirus around. And then sure enough, in 2 weeks from now, when those cases spike again, I can point back to that particular day and say, look, I told you so. It was all because of these protests. We need to shut it back down again. Now, I am not saying that's what happened. I'm not saying that's what happened now. All I'm saying is when these types of things, when we're in such volatility, when you're being stretched so thin, when people's emotions and nerves are already there, it's exposed, it's raw. That's what I'm just saying is I was a little bit fearful yesterday that I really hope none of that's going on, because I guarantee you 90 to 95 to 99% of those people there fully believed in the cause, fully believed in what they were doing. But it just takes that one individual to sort of foul things up a little bit. And I don't really have much evidence for that right now. I'm just saying, be aware of some of that stuff going on. And to Sherry's point a second ago, okay, this is a little bit of what she's talking about. And here's one of the stories that very few people are actually mentioning today. This is coming out of LA County. And I was actually telling these two right before we came on air. I'm slightly hesitant to actually play this clip, only because the science is so new, because it has yet to be, say, fully verified or replicated, duplicated, whatever the word is. But listen to this doctor. This is from LA County. The quick breakdown of this is the virology testing itself, or the testing he's about to explain, might actually indicate in LA County that we're talking close to possibly 400 to 450,000 people that have had COVID-19 already. Now, initially, that sounds quite alarming, but to Sherry's point before, the information on some of these metrics we're giving, the modeling data behind it, the number of people that have come down with this, think about it this way: the higher the number of people that have confirmed had this before, the lower the death rate is. Okay, the lower the death rate is, now we're start talking about a comparative flu season. And this is where I've said, y'all, I hesitate to even play this clip. I hesitate to even go down that road, but this is a qualified expert speaking on behalf of LA County. So I feel somewhat comfortable putting this out there. Anyways, just listen to this guy for a second. We'll break it down here.
So now what did we find? There were two important findings. The first finding was that, as Dr. Ferrer mentioned, when we tested about 863 individuals who were representative of LA County, about 4.1% of them tested positive. And now we know the population of Los Angeles of adults in Los Angeles County is about 8 million. So if you take that population of 8 million and apply the 4.1%, what we get is about 320,000 adults in Los Angeles County who have had a COVID infection before April 9th, before we started doing the testing. You compare this to the confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Los Angeles County, what we get is that the number of true infections based on the study is 40 times larger than the number of confirmed cases.
Now he goes on to make one more important point that I'll share, that I'll explain here.
So this highlights the important...
We're done talking with you. I'll go on to explain here in just a second. But the important part, if I can get my mouse to work, whatever, we'll just keep on the screen. The important part is exactly what you just heard, okay? That important part being, you got to look at the total numbers that are going on here. The total numbers being, if you expound this to, say, a couple 100,000 cases, now all of a sudden the death rate is down to, I don't know, 0.1, 0.3%, 0.4%.
But we've been talking about this the whole time, though, Grant. The whole time we've talked about, and it's just not been emphasized in our country. We've talked about the difference between confirmed cases and suspected cases. Because and all we're getting now is some actual statistically driven scientific data on how many suspected cases in a given geographical location there are. Because obviously there's more people that have COVID-19 than the people who are on respirators right now. Right. Obviously, what we're looking at is the worst of the worst. And I don't mean people who are actually like bad people or something, just people who had the best case scenario of having the worst possible reaction to the disease. I mean, from the very beginning, even with the numbers out of China, this is where the deception was so critical, and where you can go back and look at it. The numbers everyone was focusing on, including our federal government, including the WHO, were the confirmed cases and the death rate. And that made the chance of death seem so high. But when you actually look at reality with viruses and infectious diseases and influenza, the number of suspected cases over confirmed cases is like an order of magnitude of 100. It's like 100 versus a million. That's I don't know that because I'm not a statistical scientist, but that's been the case the whole time. We're just finally getting people emphasizing those numbers out of LA. And I bet you there's people who don't want us to do that for some reason. And I bet they're Chinese.
Well, don't let the American government off the hook either. Let's not forget, these are the people that have kept testing from happening. And there's so much blame to go around. It's not even funny. But when you have an encouragement by the CDC and the World Health Organization to report any suspected death that of someone having corona, that their death is from corona, that's a huge difference. Because like we're apparently coronavirus is the cure for strokes and heart attacks, because those are way lower than they normally are. Why do you think that is? Because they're counting everything. There was one lady I saw online under an article about the deaths. They mentioned her mother dying of it in one of these counties. I think it was in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure. She said in the comments, my mother died of a heart attack. She was found in an autopsy to have COVID. She didn't die of COVID. She had it. She didn't die of it. She died of a heart attack. So, we have real people standing up and saying these things. I wish I could find that again. But the point is that why would they do that? And they're saying we need to be very scientifically precise. They're giving you all this information as if it's the gospel truth, and that they have all these numbers, when they're actually saying, well, we're just guessing. Like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. And people have to understand that the political agenda and the medical community are separate on this. Like there's a political agenda going on, and that is who controls what happens in the medical community. And some in the medical community are trying to stand up. I mean, we had the people who, at the beginning of this whole thing in the States anyways, who the scientists were told, no, you cannot do this testing because it doesn't meet the criteria, on a guy who had actually been in Wuhan, was there and sick, had a temperature of like 103 or 4. And they said, you cannot test this guy because he doesn't meet the criteria. So they did it anyways. They went out and did their own tests against, the law or the authorities, but that's what they're having to do to get actual information. So they're not, these people are predators. Don't think of them as your protectors. They're your predators. And they have an agenda here.
Some of this testing that Sherry's talking about in particular is this PCR testing from the clip that we just played, this chain reaction testing. And here's how the numbers break down from that clip we just played, okay? So since the numbers of infections, based on this representative sample that they did of 863 adults that were tested earlier this month, this is in LA County alone, researchers at USC, working in collaboration with the public health department, found that approximately 4.1% of the county's adult population has the antibody to the virus, meaning in breakdown medical terms, I presume if you have the antibody to the virus, it means you've had the virus already at some point. So 4.1% of the 863 adults that they tested had the antibody to the virus already. Now, taking into account that statistical margin of error, the results indicate that 2.8% to 5.6% of the county's adult population already has the antibody virus. Now, what does that translate to, Mr. Henry? Here's what it means in practical terms. It translates to the idea that anywhere from 220,000 to 440,000 adults in the county, in LA County alone, have already had COVID-19. That's 28 to 55 times higher than the tally confirmed cases in the study previously. Now, why does that matter? It sounds like it's even more apocalyptic than it was before. Not necessarily. In perspective, what that means is in contrast to the current crude case fatality rate of about 4.5%, a 4.5% death rate that they're looking at in LA County alone. In contrast to that, this new study suggests that the death rate could be 0.1 or 0.2% of the people infected by the virus will die, which would mean that COVID-19 is only somewhat more deadly than a normal flu season. I think that's a little bit of what Sherry's talking about. Here's a very important point, though, I think needs to be stressed. And this is something that this doctor went on to say. He went on to say that, look, since the number of infections in LA County is much higher than the official numbers indicate, this doctor said that the press briefing that the risk of infection is correspondingly higher. That's something that needs to be, look, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. You can hold both these beliefs at the same time, that one, it might be like a heavy flu season, but because you can transmit it, it's so much more transmittable than a normal virus, you also need to be probably slightly more careful than you would a normal flu season. But to paint these sort of apocalyptic scenarios and to shut down economies for 2 months, I think people are finally getting their head around, Sherry. And that's why I was saying before, with opening up what started this whole conversation, with opening up the Tennessee economy starting on April 30th, some businesses as early as April 27th, and I'm about to go through a comparison of what other states are doing. I don't want to play into that fear too much of people using some of this data to spurn people on when they shouldn't be, to get people out of their homes when they should be more cautious if you have underlying conditions that you may see susceptible to in a normal flu season, let alone one that's slightly more transmittable than another one. What Sherry's saying is absolutely correct here. Personal responsibility, the ramifications that come along with that, good, bad, or otherwise, okay? That's what needs to be reigning supreme here, I believe. Localized results, localized solutions implemented properly, and people taking some personal responsibility. Dude, if your job doesn't require you to show up, don't show up if you don't feel comfortable to some extent, right? I'll kick it to Sherry for response if you want to. Then we'll go over what the other states are doing in this nation. Go ahead there, Sherry.
Yeah, I think, you should do what makes you peaceful. And you should, people are really good at assessing risk to their lives. People are usually pretty good at that. If there is an actual risk of death, people are going to quarantine themselves. You won't have to tell healthy people that they need to go into quarantine. The people that are at low risk of dying of this as well. So most people could have gone about their businesses. You're seeing places like Sweden do that. And one of the other things that I learned, and I'm no expert in this, but that part of the herd immunity requires people to be out and about. Like quarantining is one of the worst things you can do to stop the herd immunity, because you need the most of the people. And we were like places getting to that point, say South Korea, that was actually almost getting to the point where they had like herd immunity. They then did the shutdown of the quarantines, and then it reversed, right? So that I'm sure there's somebody that's more scientific that could explain that better. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I have heard from some people. Also, that in the UK, 2018, as of a week and a half ago, they had more deaths in 2018 from the flu than they did this year. And yet, what's the difference here? The difference is it's a politicized agenda on a massive scale. Like we have an epidemic of power grabs, like an epidemic of state predation is what we actually have, a pandemic of that, I think. So be cautious, be smart, wash your friggin' hands. Like this is something we've always known. I used to be amazed. I worked at the courthouse up in Clinton, and at the lawyers and people that would come in there and go to the bathroom and not wash their hands. So this is something like a reminder, like if people were doing that more, there'd probably be less instances of even getting sick, but people are not falling. Like most people don't even know someone. I know one person personally who's died of it, and she was already sick.
I know it sounds crazy, but like washing hands was one of the biggest inventions of the early 20th century. It literally saved billions of lives. I think the death rate for childbirth used to be 50%, and most people attributed that to the fact that they hadn't instituted washing hands. And in fact, the person who invented washing hands was someone who delivered babies, and they killed him for it because it upended the system so much. And it took 15 years after his death to actually institute it. But it's an important technology. It's as important as like the A-bomb getting invented in the 20th century. Yeah, I mean, it's saved billions of lives.
Even more recent than that, you read some of Malcolm Gladwell's work. And I don't know if it's in Outliers or one of his other books, but I've read several of his books, and he talks about that, how in, I think it was Boston Hospital, y'all, I could be wrong, but they were having a high instance of infectious rates that were killing people. And what they found out was that the doctors weren't washing their hands enough. The nurses weren't washing their hands enough. When they put up signs that said, remember to wash your hands. They did a culture of a handprint and grew it, and then put that on a sign and said, remember to wash your hands. Your patients' lives depend on it. When they started doing that, it dropped. They had a regular cases of infection. So these are things that even educated people forget about. It seems so mundane. It seems childish, like, oh, little kids get taught to wash their hands, but it's a really important hygienic practice. So that alone is something that most people started doing. They started implementing these things. They started implementing the social distancing, and people were doing all right. Like, we didn't need the quarantine. The quarantine was absolutely out of fear.
And I think most of what, not we're saying necessarily, but at least what I've been saying most of the time, is this is my personal opinion, is that, look, regardless of whatever scientific data might come out, almost in the same sense of like a non-overlapping magisteria, whatever scientific data might come out, don't let that be influenced solely by your political ideology. Here's what I mean, okay? Don't let the politics of the stuff going on behind the scenes solely influence how you read these numbers, good, bad, or otherwise. Again, if you have some data that's coming out of USC and LA County saying that, like, look, man, we might have 450,000 people that came down with this thing, and it might make the death rate look more like 1.1, 0.3%. Be careful, because it's still a pretty deadly flu season, and you can transmit it really easy, but it's probably not the 4% death rate we were talking before. Okay,
it's not going to kill healthy people.
Right. Don't allow whatever politics you brought into that scenario before, if it helps or disproves your case, just focus on the data first, and then somehow synthesize that into the rest of your worldview. Conversely, if the rest of the data comes out on the back and it says, well, I don't know, now we've tested 20 million people in America, we're now looking like the death rate is closer to 4, 5, 6%, which is 100 times higher, if not 1,000 times higher than your normal flu season. Well, start listening up, man. All of it ultimately falls based upon what Sherry just said a second ago. It's all that aspect of personal responsibility, is it not? And I go into some of these comments here. One in particular I wanted to get Sherry's take on also is Josh said, never let a good tragedy go to waste. Eric said a second ago, and if they tested more people and had accurate testing, the death toll would be much, much lower. Without a doubt, the powers that are using this to gain political power. Just wait till the election comes up. Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious.
Never forget that there were companies who had the tests ready and were ready to send them out, because the government's tests that they sent out didn't even work, and the tests that tested the tests didn't work.
Well, so, the original tests were from China, and that's why they didn't work. The original tests were part of this war footing. I'm telling you, it's a war footing China's on. They intentionally made it so we couldn't test people in the beginning, creating all that confusion, that unknown feeling that caused the authoritarianism. I know. Oh, go ahead.
China is not our friend, but they're not our enemy either. Let's not forget who funds this research. Let's not forget who gives patents to China. Like, let's never believe that the Chinese are actually they are the new boogeyman that they need to control you. This is about control. So, you can't lay in bed with the Chinese like the Americans do. I'm talking governments, not people. Lay in bed with them, fund them, give them access to technologies, and then call them your enemy. That's a bit contrived. These are the powers that be in this world love nothing more than warfare, because it gives them the ability to control populations and do what they want. And you are a tax farm. You are their existence. They are parasites. They're parasitic in nature, and they live off of you. And the more able the ability they have to control you, the better off they are. So, that said, the point, what was he was saying that the last comment you read?
Talking about Eric saying that something about political power. Just wait till the election comes up and stuff.
That the CDC and the FDA are the ones that kept those tests from you. Why? Why did they keep the tests from the hospitals, the places that need them? Because of regulation. And they could say, well, these haven't passed this or that or whatever. Look, they had them ready to go. Why couldn't they use them? That's a question of government. That's government impeding people and getting what actually could have helped done. Because look, the cookie cutter responses of the government don't work. You don't need to shut down Knox County like you might need to shut down LA County. The population density is different for one. Like there's a lot that plays into it, but never forget that government is the one that impeded the tests.
Well, let me say this though too, Sherry, and this is not going to be surprising to you at all. I think this is actually what you're preaching against or preaching towards in some sense. John just said in Facebook a second ago, my bosses would not be willing to let us stay home, or conversely, I suppose, let us go to work or whatever, unless there was an order from the governor. And I think honestly, that's where a lot of people are now. Whether you want to see this in an authoritative sense or not, and I'm giving way more credit to than what I'm about to say. I'm giving way more credit to these bosses or otherwise that from what about, just listen here for a second, okay? If you could make some reasonable, rational argument that in a representative republic, I've chosen these people through my own sort of, contractual rights, that I've given this off almost like a proxy, okay, to go vote on my behalf in a representative way, that now he's representing my beliefs. Sorry, just hold on, stay with me for a second here, Sherry. If I go that far with it, and I go that far up the chain, I know I'm getting in statist territory, but if I go that far up the chain, that maybe I had a right to say who is and is not governor, and even in the administrative selections, I actually have some backing behind that. Maybe I could get my ideological head around this idea of through a representative republic, and they're working with the experts. Maybe they know my best intentions. The point being is, however you want to justify it, that's not what's happening. Clearly, that is not what's happening.
They work
I'm trying to give the most
experts.
grace possible. But if you go down that route, there are hordes of individuals and businesses in this state that, even if you don't want to use force alone, just by way of simple rhetoric or rhetorical coercion, will do things simply because the governor came out and made a statement about it, or didn't make a statement about it. You know what I'm saying? If the governor is not talking about it, very few people in this state in particular will take it seriously, in spite of medical evidence sometimes, which somewhat doesn't fly in the face of what you're saying, but it's a difficult thing to overcome when you think of like, dude, there has to be personal responsibility here. You have to look at the data. You have to look at the facts and act accordingly. But a lot of people will not act accordingly unless they're told to act accordingly. I'm not saying everybody is a lemming. I'm not. But anyways,
I think that goes again to what I said. If there was a real risk to people and they were really seeing this going on, I mean, there's a risk to some people for sure. But even since the beginning, they've said people who are healthy within, that aren't infants and aren't elderly or all otherwise immunocompromised are going to be fine. Most likely they're going to be fine. And so that data, like, this is one of the things that could tell you that the government, look at even Knox County. When Knox County started bringing down the quarantine, what are some of the businesses that were deemed essential? Florists, caterers. My son is a barista at Starbucks and has worked every day.
Yeah.
Please.
That's essential.
Please. That's themselves telling you that this is not what they're putting it out to be. They know, like, come on. It's ridiculous. Florists, you need a florist. That's essential. Like, what, for funeral flowers from all the dead bodies piled up? No. You need caterers for events that can't even happen. Come on, people. That's I don't know if it's cronyism. I don't know what the thought behind that is. I'm going to love to ask Mayor Jacobs that on Friday. But like, why? My son is a barista. Nobody needs their coffee. If this is a deadly disease, as deadly as they're saying, then people would not be going out to get Starbucks and yelling at my son because he can't work fast enough for the people lined up. Like, come on, this is ridiculous. They telling you themselves in the act, like they're saying quarantine, but then the businesses that they're allowing to stay open and called essential, like if it's really that bad of a deal, then people would know that. And so also to the other fact, if you are really feeling at risk and you work for an employer that is saying, if you're going to lose your job if you don't come, is it better for you to quit and have the economy so that you can go get another job? Or have the whole economy shut down with thousands of people out of work where you can't go get another job from your bastard employer that won't let you. Like, come on, think about that. Like that, there people are right now from the top down authoritarian method. 325,000 people out of work. It's going to be a lot harder for everyone to find a job now. That's just in Tennessee alone. So yeah, I think that sure, there are always going to be bad people. You cannot legislate yourself into utopia. Like you cannot say that, oh, we have laws against murder, so murder doesn't exist anymore. We have laws against, people are going to be bad people sometimes, but most people are not. Most people would understand. And if they don't, then you probably don't want to work for them anyways. And you can shout that to the high heavens and it would hurt them. Like, so there are other ways of doing things, and you can't take one little instance of, like, I feel for people whose employers would do that to them, but that's something that your right of free association should cover, because then you can everybody know, and word of mouth is still the best marketing anybody can get. It's also still the best way to harm a business that's bothered you or hurt you. So to me, it's worse that the economy gets shut down, because then that person can't just go get another job.
And by the way, you heard Sherry mention there a second ago, as good a time as any to plug it right now. She's going to be interested to talk to or ask Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs that on Friday. What she means actually is at the top of the show notes here. You can see if you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube or anywhere else. Boy, David Sean Thompson does a great job of plugging the show notes in. Directly under the title, the first thing you see is that Glenn Jacobs event. If you click that Zoom link and register with us this Friday, we're actually having an event where we're talking to Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs a little bit about these issues. In particular, he has a phased-in plan for what it's going to look like for the economy reopening again. We're going to talk to him about some of the practicalities behind that, what it looks like, and I'd also like to get into a little bit of the philosophy behind. Look, man, I'm biased here, all right, because I used to dress up as the guy for Halloween, but I personally think that County Mayor Glenn Jacobs is possibly one of the best in government in the entire nation. Okay. Right.
Definitely. Yeah. I would agree. I was a little disappointed at first when he was like, go with the quarantine, but then his rhetoric afterwards against Bill Lee, I really appreciated that, because look, they used data they shouldn't have in order to track you. And look, there wasn't a number spike. They didn't put more, like, they came down. Tennessee's been really good, honestly. We haven't had like the kind of totalitarian police state that we have even in Kentucky, looking at license plates of people and going to church. But they did use your cell phone data after they said you should stay home, to see that people were still going about their business. And because of that not because numbers spiked, because of that, they said, no, we're putting more of a quarantine. We're going to actually make more businesses shut down. So that's what they used. And Bill Lee should be taken out of office for that. That is a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights.
What Sherry's referencing, obviously, is part of the reasoning behind Governor Lee's latest, and by latest I mean about 2 weeks ago. I just want to make sure people are following if they don't know what you mean as far as tracking cell phone data.
I love it.
Well, I mean, but to be fair though, every single state and the federal government was doing that.
Right? Yeah.
Every single state was doing it in private partnership, not even through some kind of state agency. It was through private partnership, through the cell phone companies. Authorized by the 1996 Federal Communications Act, reauthorized through the Defense Authorization Act in 2009. It's totally legal. I just want to throw that out there. And and they do it all the time, and they haven't stopped since 1996. They just used it recently to track you for the purposes of if you have COVID or not. But yes, our state was not only good on the authoritarian front. I know it wasn't perfect, but a lot better than other places where they were like arresting you for not wearing a mask at the grocery store or on the corner, or like telling kids, hold on, or like telling kids to go home. But we also were good on the health front. I think we didn't even surpass 700 hospitalizations, and we did increase our hospital capacity. Because, I mean, I don't know, there was a misnomer there at the beginning that the quarantine was for the purposes of stopping the virus. That was not the case. At least even people felt like that was the case, but that wasn't even what the government was saying. It was to increase hospital capacity and testing capacity, and then we were going to get back to normal once we felt like we could handle whatever the actual peak was going to be. And then we found, and that was when we thought it was super dangerous. And now we know it's just at least slightly less dangerous than we thought it was. But Grant, I'm still interested to hear too about what the other states are doing. Because it's one thing, like I know that it's not perfect. I need to turn off my Microsoft Teams here because everyone in our company is sending me a message right now. But and everyone's seeing that. But anyway, like I'd like to compare, because even though we weren't perfect, I think it's a hell of a lot better than even our neighbors to the north, than even in Kentucky
or anywhere.
Or Georgia.
If you have credibility and you say that you love freedom, then you need to hold your representatives accountable.
Valid.
Like
I hear you.
that's our representative, and
I hear
he
you.
violated the Fourth Amendment. So you can't say, well, they did worse in Pennsylvania, so we should lessen them here. Like it's all the same. They have Edward Snowden called it the architecture of oppression, and it is in place right now. They didn't have to go and get this stuff. They already had it. They already had the ability to do these things.
Well, Josh just said in Facebook a second ago, said, what gets me is I know people who are still working and being snarky about the people protesting that are allowed to return to work. That's another important factor, is that like the government dictates who can and cannot, who is and is not essential right now. And because a mom and pop shop so happens to not sell essentials, but they sell home goods, you can still buy home goods from Target. Right. But because they're selling essential goods as well, whatever. Daniel on Facebook, Daniel Snowden goes on to say, totally legal unless you look at the Constitution, but the Constitution has been ignored since the Whiskey Rebellion. Importantly, to Shine's point, I think what he was mentioning a second ago is one of the exceptions to the Fourth Amendment is consent. So if a cop pulls you over and he says, can I search your car? And you say, yeah, go ahead and search my car. It's not technically violative of the First Amendment because you gave him consent. In this sense, what they were using to track cell phone data was anytime we go on Facebook Live, or anytime you post something in Snapchat, or take a picture with a GPS tag on it, or use your GPS in general, any location data, you have consented to make that available to anybody that has public access to that information. So these private companies were aggregating that data and then passing it off to government. It's a very sly
so it's not consent
circumvention of the Fourth Amendment. See, that's what I'm saying. See,
I can have sex with you and consent to that.
That's
to have sex with everybody you know.
That's what Sherry is saying, is unless you're consenting in the rights itself to allow the government to track that, to make legislation off of, or dare I say an executive order, maybe you didn't consent to that. Maybe you consented to Facebook or Google to just use it. I don't know, send you ads. Who knows? But that's the way Governor Lee did it. And I think that's a little bit of what Sherry's saying, where both David and Sherry are probably right in the same time, of David saying, look, you technically signed off on it. Sherry's saying you didn't sign off on it to be used against you. And what I'm saying in the back end is like, hold on, none of that data, by the way, did anything to indicate where my end goal was. Okay, all it did was showing that I was traveling around. A lot of people I know were just driving for sake of sanity to get out of the house, because Tennessee's a beautiful place and they just wanted to drive around and look at stuff. I know that because my wife and I did that. Okay, we drove around and just drove through state parks. There was nothing indicating that data like I went to go about my normal business to interact with other human beings. You can't track that aspect of it. If you're
who knows if when you were going and doing that, you weren't staying 6 feet apart and you were washing your hands, maybe you were wearing a mask. Like, they don't have any of those other factors. And the fact is that if people really were that scared of it, they would self-quarantine. If people were dropping, if healthy people were dropping like flies, I guarantee you no government mandate would be needed.
And here's what
we talked about. Hold
on,
real quick. We talked about that on the show, Sherry, about the only way that this could be done is through voluntary action. The government could not enforce a nationwide quarantine. Even if they used every single employee working overtime, they couldn't enforce a nationwide quarantine. If there was going to be a quarantine, it was only going to happen through voluntary means. And that's the practical reality of it, not even like the ideal solution. That's the practical reality. And anybody who did stay home, especially in the state of Tennessee, did so by choice. Even if your work was canceled or if your school was canceled, you could have gone anywhere you wanted to. You could have done anything you wanted. In fact, I know lots of people who, when their regular job quit, they figured out other ways to make money. And that's what they did.
I guarantee if they had a section in all those consent clauses that said, by the way, maybe later on down the road when there's an enforced quarantine, any of this data that you're making public available is going to be used by the government to track you. So many more people would have clicked off that location tracking.
Okay, no. Let me throw something out there. Is Daniel Snowden said in the chat room, you can't be legitimately claiming that by using a cell phone, it's consent to be tracked by the government. I'm not saying that from a legal should point of view. I'm saying if you use a cell phone, you use Facebook or Google or whatever, unless you've been living under a rock for almost a decade, it's been public, you technically are consenting for the government to track you, because unless you're sleeping under a rock, you should know that the government uses and partners with Facebook and Google. So I'm not saying it's a should thing. I'm saying it's a practical reality. If you use Facebook or Google, you are consenting to being tracked, and that's reality. So I'm not saying it should be the case, but it is the case. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Governor Lee was using this data. And if you continue to use your cell phone after you heard that they were tracking everybody, then yes, I count that as consent, because you don't get to ignore reality and count it as not consenting. That's my opinion.
That's like saying because they've made something legal that it's okay. The laws are meant to trap us. They're not meant to hold the government back, no matter what they say, because they ignore the Constitution when it doesn't suit them all the time. They ignore the state laws when it doesn't suit them all. These Republicans who have Tennessee on lockdown, who claim to be concerned about these things, clearly, they love to quote Thomas Jefferson and that, someone who wants safety over freedom deserves neither. Look, you guys are those people. You desire safety over freedom, and you don't deserve it. If that's the case, if you can look at Bill Lee and say, well, I think he did the right thing. I'm not saying you're saying that, Shine, but if you can say, well, I understand because this is a separate, no, it's not. Your rights don't evaporate because there's a crisis. You have rights that are endowed by your creator within you. You have those rights, and they don't stop because some governor says you don't have the right to. Now, if you want to put yourself at risk and be an idiot, then that is yours. This is the same argument for seatbelt laws. If you are a Republican and you don't think that they need seatbelt laws because that's a nanny thing to do, and you get to take that risk, then why is it any different right now? That right did not disappear.
Hey, and this is, again, one of the reasons why I like, and I've always told this to you, Sherry, the fact that you are so consistent. Consistency is a thing in this day and age that is quickly dying. Right? It's at a pure all-time high of the atrophy level. It really is. Okay. And this is where you could look at what some of these other states are doing and think to yourself, like, in perspective, Tennessee is doing great. And I think that's a valid point to make. But what Sherry's saying is like, okay, great's one thing, but my level of expectation is far better than just what another state is doing. That's not the standard I hold myself to. For example, in Indiana,
I want principled people to have principles. No, they don't have principles. They have mental assent to principles.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hear you. In Indiana, the Indiana stay-at-home order is set to expire on April 30th. Governor Holcomb, a Republican, has warned that not all restrictions will be dropped by May 1st, but said, quote, "We're thinking early May for starting to ease some rules. Schools are closed throughout the rest of the year." In Kentucky's, quote, "healthy at home." Dude, you gotta love that rhetoric. Okay, I don't know how many ways there are to phrase this stay at home, safer at home, healthier at home type thing or whatever.
Very Orwellian.
But Kentucky's healthier at home one is
I like the hunker down order from the Alaskan town. The hunker down order.
Hunker down Alaskan. And I want to say
that's a real thing. That was a real proclamation by their mayor, was have a hunker down.
I don't mean to sound like I'm yelling at you guys. I'm not. I know I get loud. I'm very passionate about these things, and so I'm not yelling at Shine and Grant. I'm just yelling. I like to rage against the machine,
Oh no! Part of the reason I brought that up is so you could counterpoint me in a bombastic way. I mean, that's fantastic. That's why we have you on, Sherry. We wanted someone on who could be that voice on today. Like, we really wanted that opinion to be represented. I mean, for real, because like, me and Grant have been trying to play like adults, like the adults in the room of the situation. Like everybody knows our principles.
Be respectable.
Well, not just that. You want to be part of the conversation. You want to be part of the conversation with decision makers, which we are in some cases. So we wanted to seem measured, but we wanted to have someone on who could kind of say what we're thinking a little bit.
At all, and appealing to them for my life. Like, they don't have any authority over me. I haven't given them anything. I haven't signed any social contract. I'm not a part of their little game. I don't care about electing them to office and playing their game. So, that's me. And I understand that you have to do that if you're going to get to people. But, where does it come down to where we talk about personal responsibility. We hear Republicans every year talk about personal responsibility and how they believe in that. But do you really? Like, when the rubber meets the road, do you really? Like, I'm not saying that people dying, libertarians are accused of this all the time, that we don't care about people and people. No, that's not it at all. I care about the 12 people that committed suicide. I care about the 325 people who have lost their jobs. I care about those people as well. The point is that when you intervene as a government, there are always unintended consequences that make the situation worse than it is on its own. I care about people dying of this and being safe. That's the personal responsibility part. And I don't need some government. I can listen to experts and hear what they have to say. I don't need the corporate media and the government that are in cahoots with each other feeding me a line and then ratting on my neighbors for doing something I don't
Sherry,
like.
I think you just hit it right there. Honestly, I think that's the core of why I like to have you on sometimes. Also, is if you really get down to the fundamental of what Sherry's presenting here, it's rooted in a sense of compassion. Okay, it's rooted in a sense of not being intellectually belittling. Okay, what Sherry, I think, what you're getting across to me is you do not see individuals as liabilities to be taken care of.
Absolutely.
Right? You do not see individuals as we need this massive social contract for the lesser people so that we can take care of them. They are not liabilities. They're fully capable adult human beings, just as I am. Okay. Yeah. Not only do I not have the right to tell them what to do, they have just as much ability to do it for themselves. And more importantly, it's empowering. Okay. It's moving. It's encouraging. Yeah. Say that again.
That your communities love you. Like your community should know, like take, your church community or whatever. That's a community that will take care of itself. They'll make sure the elderly have the food and are getting, not being exposed. Like people care about people. The government doesn't care about you. Are a number to them. Like that's the thing. We become statistics, just like all of this. And so I don't need to be like, I went to ask my neighbors, like who are all elderly, hey, you need me to go to the grocery store for you? Because it's not a risk for me. Like I might get it, but I'm going to survive. I'm a fairly healthy younger person. They are actually at risk. So I don't have to do that. I did it because I feel a connection with my neighborhood and my community. I think like most people do, hey, I'll go see if they need some help. Like this is part of how government breaks down those communities by telling us that they will take care of us and they'll tell us what to do and they'll tell us when we're safe and they'll tell us how to treat people. No, we have to start taking our that responsibility to care for our neighbors on our own. And that's part of the whole freedom aspect, is that personal responsibility that extends to your family and your community.
Hey, Mr. Henry, we've talked a lot about kind of the debate leading up to yesterday about kind of whether or not there should have been a lockdown in the first place. That's kind of been where the show has been. And then, but I want to see if we can, before we leave, I know that we're not getting unlocked down till the 30th. I think that's important to keep reminding people. It's not like the economy's open today in Tennessee. So just so y'all know, it's going to be open on the 30th. And then also, what does that look like? Because I don't think it's a full open, right? It's a measured open. And then also it won't be the whole state, because certain municipalities and counties will have the authority to not open if they see fit to not open. I think in places like maybe Williamson or Dixon, they may not, right? Because they've had over 1,000 cases in those in those counties. But also I want to know if there was any information, because I wasn't able to watch it yesterday. I was working on my rescheduled wedding when Governor Lee was streaming. Another casualty of the lockdown was my wedding. So I'm kind of upset about it too. But do we know anything about the state legislature and if they're going to actually go back in session, or if they're just going to live with the budget being passed? Did he say anything about that?
No, and I would assume that the state legislature, that decision as to whether or not they're going to meet or whether they're going to stay in recess, that would primarily, I believe, be left up to the speakers of both.
I'm sure. I was just wondering if he announced it. That's all. I mean, I know that it's not his decision, but it would have been a good forum to hear about it.
It would have. No, you're right. And again, I can't. There's some information that I think Sean and I are privy to. I couldn't speculate about.
Well, don't get into that, of course. I'm just talking about what you heard someone say. That's all.
Well, anything that's publicly available right now, I'll say this. Look, just be waiting around to hear from McNally in particular, Lieutenant Governor, and Cameron Sexton as well. They'll probably be making an announcement on that shortly. And by shortly, I mean like give it 3 weeks possibly, because they have until June 1st to figure out whether they're going to do this. As far as it pertains to what it's going to look like practically, that's yet another reason to pitch the thing that's coming up with Glenn Jacobs on Friday. At the top of the show notes here, you can actually see it's the second thing down. It says Glenn Jacobs event above it. It's that Zoom link. Go there, register with us. You'll get the link directly to that event. You can ask your questions directly directly to County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. I say that now, Shine, in response to your question, because part of what we're going to be going over with Glenn Jacobs, it's on Glenn Jacobs' County Mayor Facebook page, is that 3 or 4 page proposal of how to reintroduce opening up the economy again. He put that together specifically at the request of Bill Lee. Himself and a few other mayors around the area, coupled with some legislators, coupled with the 20 or 30 people that are on this economic recovery group that you can see linked again in the show notes, those 30 or 40 or 50 people with medical advisors as well, all put together their particular plans. And Glenn Jacobs is one of the most in-depth that I've seen so far as to what does that look like. A little bit of what that looks like is a phased reintroduction of restaurants, okay? You're talking limited number of capacity, you're talking limited number of certain time periods, an outrageous amount of cleaning. So anytime someone brings food to you, they may be wearing gloves or something. Retail shops, for example, you're already starting to see some of this, a 6 foot spacer, or certain aisles that might have arrows going down only one way so you don't have to cross someone in the next aisle. Or you might have sort of, not barricades, but like these little like plexiglass surroundings from the
dividers
cashiers.
and things like
Yeah,
that.
dividers. So you don't have to exchange, particular fluids or something. Little things like that here and there. Anytime you can stay in a car for something, anytime you can do curbside pickup for something, you also have to take into account the demographics that will be reintroduced earlier than others. Obviously, the ones that are less susceptible and those that have tested positive for actually having the antibody already in their system. Those people that we might say could potentially have some sense of herd immunity, I presume would be introduced quicker than others, okay? So obviously what you're going to see here is a slow roll reintroduction for the things that cater more towards a lower, or sorry, older age of demographic, all right? And we're going to take care of those that have underlying conditions the most. But again, one quick pitch here for the Glenn Jacobs thing coming up on Friday. Register with us up there. And then quick rundown here, dude, as we're in the show, another way to get a sense of what's happening in Tennessee is to look at some other states. So Indiana says we're thinking May. Indiana's not exactly sure yet. Kentucky's Democrat Governor Andy Beshear now has said there's no end date. We have not set an end date for this thing yet. So he just plans to follow whatever the federal benchmarks are. Who knows what that is? Mississippi's a little bit in line with us. Their whole thing too is expiring on April 27th. Governor Tate Reeves, we call him a Liberty champion down there. He's actually falling a bit in line with Governor Lee. Georgia's following as well. They are planning to open up gyms, hair salons, elective surgeries, all beginning on April 24th. Now, their schools are also shut down to the end of the year. Michigan, though, to give you an example of a bad one, their stuff is just like Michigan stay-at-home orders expires on April 30th. And the governor there says that she hopes to take steps to go forward on May 1st, but also that she has no plans to relax anything right now. So we'll see, man. We'll see. But here's the ideas in general. Our surrounding states are kind of hit or miss. A little bit to the north, they're like, who knows? Whenever we say, and a little bit to the south, they're like, dude, you're gonna go out and bowling, get your haircuts, and have elective surgeries all on the same day if you want to, starting on the 24th, right? So it's, you got a smattering across the board.
I want to go back to something that I heard Sherry say earlier, that liberty and safety are not synonyms. I think that was her quote, and I think that's an excellent quote. I just want to say I'm happy I live where I live for a number of reasons. For the political environment, for great friends and neighbors like you two and all the people in our chat room. But like I'm kind of glad I don't live in Florida, where they were just like, whatever, go to the beach, because that seems less safe to me. But I'm glad that it wasn't a completely lockdown situation like New York or Michigan, where people weren't allowed to go fish by themselves. Or, it was a really nice happy medium where they made me feel like, even though they weren't really doing a whole lot as a government in the state of Tennessee, they weren't doing a whole lot. A lot of it was luck.
Right. Nothing was mandated.
Well, I'm saying even it's not like we had to deal with, we needed increased hospital capacity. We didn't even need that. So we didn't need that stereotypical, the giver of services of last resort. We didn't need the government to be that in Tennessee. So that's a little bit luck. But at the same time, there was a good balance here where they made me feel like they were doing something, made me feel safe, but I still felt free. Like I still went to the store and bought things. I went to a birthday party earlier this week with 7 people, and it was outside. We weren't worried about being seen by the cops or something. We weren't worried about getting our papers checked or getting a mask check. You're like, oh, why don't you have a mask on? Which is nice. So I thought it was a good balance where they made me feel comfortable, because there were times, I'm going to be honest, I didn't feel comfortable. Like 4 weeks ago.
Freedom sometimes comes with anxiety.
Sure. No.
I don't need the government to make me feel free. I either am or I am not. that's not a matter of degree. Like you are either
well,
free
but
or you are
sometimes
not
my
free.
freedom can run into someone's hammer, and then that, you know what I'm saying? Like,
right?
sometimes
Yeah.
you
You
can
should
run
try
into.
to minimize them in your life, but
It's not just a mental, am I free or not? Sometimes my own personal, my freedom would need to be defended. Through force.
Yeah, by you.
By me. Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying no one was trying to physically impede my freedom is, I guess, what I was saying, Sherry. No one was physically stopping me or even verbally trying to discourage me from doing the things. And I'm just glad it wasn't kind of like Wild Wild West like Florida personally.
Right. Well, Florida, like, look, the Florida, when they had all those kids on the beach, who came after them were cops, and the cops weren't social distancing.
No,
they weren't. Like, these kids clearly didn't feel that they were at risk. So you see the guy, they arrested the guy that was surfing by himself, and they came and 2 cops are grabbing him by the arms and dragging him away. Like, that's not social distancing. And this guy wasn't even in contact with anyone. So I don't know that they were as I can't remember if that was in Florida or not, but the beach thing, they come up with the kids and they're like knocking them on the ground and all kind of things. They have a legion of police officers there, all making contact with these kids. Like, so it's okay if you want to bring down the hammer on people, for you to not social distance and to make yourselves, at risk or whatever, to enforce the laws still. Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it was a Wild West to me.
Well, you know what I'm saying? I just I just liked the way that it's happened here. I felt good. I mean, I personally quarantined. I bought enough food for 4 weeks and didn't leave my house. The first time I drove a car in 3.5 weeks was on Monday to go to that birthday party. Yeah. I hadn't even driven a car.
And personally, I've been staying home too if I don't need to go out. Like, I've been to Home Depot a few times. I've been to get groceries. But my 17-year-old son works with the public. He's, like I said, a barista at the local Kroger that hasn't shut down. And so he's bringing that exposure home to me anyways. It's one of those things where I thought, well, if the hospitals do get at capacity, I'm less worried about that now. It was at the beginning when I was like, well, maybe I'll take some caution, like most people probably were doing. And so I've sort of gotten over that. But I'm just not going anywhere if I don't really need or want to. But
yeah, and I think that's honestly, I think that's the theme of the show today, is as Governor Lee is talking about. Look, we're talking April 30th, possibly a full roll-in reintroduction. April 27th, as early as April 27th. Some businesses that have been deemed non-essential before, we're starting to roll that in comparison's sake. I don't know if you're going to see bowling alleys open in Tennessee as early as next Monday, like you might in Georgia, but we're going to get closer and closer to that step. And I think the theme of today, honestly, is like, look, man, we're all smart people out here, okay, fully capable of making these decisions. If you listen to medical advice, medical experts, and there's a strong indication from your assessment that you're safer at home, that you need to stay at home, that you're more susceptible than other individuals, you're just personally frightened about it. You have individuals that you live with that you could pass this along to that have underlying conditions. Whatever your reason is, if you want to make that decision, dude, by all means, that is your individual right to do so. And you're fully justified in making that decision. Okay. On the other hand, though, if you want to be able to go out and interact with other human beings, my personal assessment, that is, unless and until your freedom encroaches upon my freedom, we really don't have much of a problem. Okay. Now, if medical evidence tells me otherwise, then I'm going to recant that statement and say, now we might have an encroaching freedom problem here. And that's a trade-off that I think even maybe some anarcho-capitalists, certainly libertarians, would be willing to have that conversation of like, look, man, your decision starting to get into my territory here. Now let's have a conversation of how we solve that. Still solve it at a local level, still solve it between individuals before you go, wild off the rails with it or something. But I think that's what the theme of the show is today. Look, man, and it's going to become an old adage. It's going to quickly become an old adage. But the old adage essentially is, do what's right for you. If you don't have to go back to work, don't go back to work. This is not some sense of a mandate that you are forced back into the working society. If your company is doing that, then yeah, you have to have a conversation with your employer. And that gets a little bit into the realm of individuality that Sherry's talking about. But if not, dude, make that decision for yourself and forget your friends, man. Forget people that are making you feel ridiculous about it. Right. Don't play coy about it either if you don't need to. If you're feeling like you're safe or whatever, if you don't want to pass it on to someone else, dude, make that decision. Right. And Sean, I know we got to end the show, but I do want to direct people.
No, we're good. Can we throw in some comments real quick as we're wrapping up
go
here?
Ahead, buddy. Sure.
Kel Northup says, the shutdown should have never happened. Daniel Snowden says, go to the beach if you want. You can make that decision, and Shine needs daddy government to dominate him. You didn't think I'd read that comment on the air, did you? I don't mind. I like Daniel a lot.
He's
I think
such a button pusher.
I love his style of comedy. It's hilarious to me. Hey, Kel says freedom is a scary thing sometimes. Let's see. There were a couple other ones I wanted to read here. Oh, that's a little bit dark. I don't want to read that. All right, that's all that I'm reading right now. You guys be careful there in the comments. But is there anything else, Grant, as we're wrapping up, that you feel like anyone needs to know? Because, I mean, if you ever want to just, like I've said, if you want to see inside Grant's head, it's a vast mausoleum of stuff. I mean, just click on the show notes, and you'll have to scroll forever to get to the video. Or you can just click his Everlink note. I mean, forget going to Washington Post, New York Times, whatever. Just read Grant's show notes. It's better than Drudge Report. It's really good. He's been doing this.
A super condensed version of the articles themselves. Most of what these show notes are, by the way, is just me picking and choosing. Like, I cut out all the fluff of the articles, and you don't have to get through the ads as well. It's literally, okay, what's important with this article? Just give that to me. That's all I care about. That's basically what my show notes are. And there's 3 stories in particular about halfway down through the show notes. We don't have time to talk about it today. It's somewhat evergreen. We can bring it up tomorrow or towards the end of the week. But oil, by the way, if y'all didn't realize, oil producers were paying folks like $40 a barrel to sell.
No, we got to talk about this for 5 minutes at least, please.
Okay, go ahead, man.
Because international economics is it's really crucial and super important and bleeds over into the whole conversation we're having about freedom, authoritarianism in a indirect way. Because if we end up going to war over the price of oil, and it's varied, or if other countries end up going to war over the price of oil and we never get involved, that will affect your life. And the only stable oil market in the world right now, where you're like, hey, the price will probably maintain and the supply will probably maintain, is the United States. The other places in the world you get oil are Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, and a few other places, but those are the main places. All of those places could, especially because of the drop in oil price, could increasingly experience instability. I mean, do you think Saudi Arabia gets by because like everything's going great there? No, that's bread and circus. They just have plenty of money for bread. You know, it's weird. Islam bread and circus. It's not like American bread and circus, but it's their bread and circus. They give people food for free. They pay people to stay in line. They pay like warlords to not attack them and things like that. That money is drying up because the price of oil is going down. Russia had already had an economy the size of Italy. It's not, for how big that place is, they don't make as much money as they should or could. And the fact that they were making money off oil kept them at bay, kept them from wanting to expand. We saw them expand into Crimea when the economy was bad before. Right? When the economy wasn't doing well, right after the Great Recession, they expanded into Crimea. Why? It helps them defend their borders. Russia has a wide open, no natural borders. It's open plains, and it's it's like Canada's border. It's very long. They would prefer if their borders were up by Poland because there's mountains there. Poland, Austria. So that's what I mean. And there's a lot of indications they may try to expand, especially in a weird, global, uncertain time, right? And you've even heard Vladimir Putin recently say that America doesn't need to be the leader of the world anymore. I'm kind of in agreement with that, but not because someone takes it by force, because that means war, and war means an unstable economy, means I can't get my beer at the same price. You know what I'm saying? Things get bad when war happens. So the whole thing, it's a multifaceted topic. But it's very important. Pay attention to the price of oil. Pay attention to what Saudi Arabia is saying. Pay attention to what Russia is saying. Pay attention to what the U.S. government is saying about Venezuela. We may invade Venezuela to take it, to create a more stable oil market for them. That may happen. You already heard Bill Barr talking about arresting Maduro recently, like within the past month. While everything was going on with the pandemic, you had the U.S. government come out with the Army, the Navy, the Marines during the COVID-19, press conferences and say we're basically invading South America with our law enforcement. That happened. No one paid attention. It happened like 2.5 weeks ago. Now, while we're talking about what our governor's doing and whether or not we can go bowling or not, These are the other things that are happening in the world. And I encourage, and that's not even to mention everything going on with China. That's leaving China completely out of that whole conversation. And they're a heavy wrinkle. So maybe tomorrow we can get in more about this oil price stuff, because it's very important. But the good news is we're a stable oil market. All those other places are unstable. Yeah. So that means during our economic recovery that we'll be doing over the next, who knows even how long, 10 years to get back to normal, who even knows. At least we will have something that everybody wants, everybody needs, and they know will be consistent. That's the shortest I could do that, Grant. I'm sorry.
To do a quick breakdown of some of the numbers behind this too. You'll see way more detail in the 3 stories that are linked in the show notes. But yesterday, oil hit a penny per barrel. I'm talking 1 cent per barrel, and actually fell to as low as negative $40 per barrel. So what that means is these oil producers were paying people $40 per barrel to take these barrels off their hands. And part of the problem that we're seeing here is a lack of storage. Okay, so the Department of Energy is actually preparing to rent 23 million barrels of space within its strategic petroleum reserves to oil companies. Now, that is an indication of what China's talking about. When the government of any nation gets involved in anything with oil, okay, controlling storage, otherwise production, any of it, man, refineries, it's starting to look like a major problem. And I will say this, pay attention to the deals that Trump is doing on the side here, okay? So since Monday, when these oil prices have fallen in the midst of this pandemic, Trump pulled off a, quote, energy coup that could not have been done by anybody else. New York Times actually called it a prodded oil nations to reach a deal that they never would have otherwise. And what they're talking about is obviously between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Previously, in the 70s and 80s, this wouldn't have been a problem for America. We would have actually appreciated an oil problem, because the problems they have over there means low gas prices for us, and we're not an exporter of energy, so we don't have a problem with it. Now, however, we are the world's leading export of energy, with fracking and natural gas as well. So this has become our problem as well. So what the deal was basically Saudi Arabia was upset at Russia. Russia was saying, "Can y'all stop producing so much oil, man? Because you're going to drive the price down. It's gonna mess us up entirely. We're providing it to the EU and Germany. It's going to mess up the EU and Germany entirely. America's the only one that's going to be able to survive this thing. At the end of all of this, you're going to mess both of us up, man. And America's going to rise to the top just like they did in World War II. What are you not seeing about this, Saudi Arabia?" And Saudi Arabia in return said, "Nah, we're going to start producing 13 million barrels more per day."
Yeah, Saudi Arabia said, we actually, it's not even in our own self-interest, but we love the United States. It's not in our own self-interest, but we kind of want the United States to rule the world, because we don't like having an active army. I mean, that's Saudi Arabia.
We just bought $700 billion worth of arms from them, too. Let's not forget about that. All right, so Saudi Arabia is kind of in our bed. And part of me is thinking, did somebody see this coming down the pipe? Did I not know something here? To end this all out, the deal that Trump made with apparently both of them is allegedly, OPEC and all its flavor friends, Russia is not a part of OPEC, by the way, they're going to cease oil production for at least a little while to try and let the markets catch up. Now, what you looked at yesterday, this is what I'll end with. What you looked at yesterday was a contract bid that is meant to be played out at the end of this month. All that resets next month, okay? So this is not the actual price of oil. This is not what oil actually sells for once it gets to the people that are using the oil, say Boeing, who puts it in their planes. This is a bid for the future price of what the contract will eventually end up being. So all this stuff that ended up happening now, it went to kaput because nobody using it, but next month that all resets on future contracts again, and at the end of next month could be a totally different price. So don't get too wild about it. The moral of the story is oil super low price. Trump's causing some deals behind the scenes. Because of the inner feud between Saudi Arabia and Russia, the whole world is messed up. But it's okay because it's just future contracts. It's not the actual price of oil.
Hey Grant, let's let Sherry comment on all that stuff we just mentioned. And also, Sherry, if you could take some time to let people know where to find you in case for some reason, they've never heard of you before and they think you're just really awesome and they want to keep up with you. Tell them all the places. Or they
want to yell at me.
Yeah, or they want to yell at you.
Yelling at Sherry.
Tell them where they can find you, and then, definitely comment on what we're saying before we drive out of here.
Sure. Yeah. So to Shine's point about the war, all I have to say is, remember, war is the lifeblood of the state. And Americans seem to be perfectly happy with wars as long as we're starting them. So that's really, we would take too long to go into what I think about the wars around this globe. But, the United States is at the center or the underground of most of those wars. So I think that war is exactly what they do want, because it helps them a lot in a lot of ways. They make money and they also gain power. So that's really all I've said. I think the oil market will be fine. I mean, oil is something that it powers all the economies, right? You have to have it, like, and I think it's gonna catch up, hopefully. But as far as finding me, you can find me on Facebook at Sherry Voluntary, the Sherry Voluntary Show. If you Google it, I'm the only one, as far as I know. So you can find me that way. And I will be speaking at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, July 13th through the 16th.
Awesome.
They're going to have a panel there on voluntarism and non-aggression principle, things like that. So I've been asked to speak there, and I will be there, and would love to say hi to anyone if they're listening and are going to be there as well.
Sweet. That is very cool. How do they, Shine's putting up the music, we'll sign off for today. Sherry, real quick, how do they find anything for Freedom Fest, you said, if they don't know? Some of our people may not know what that is.
Yeah, Freedom Fest, Las Vegas. Okay. I'm sure you can just Google that, and it'll go to. I know they have a website. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm sure it's like
no worries at all.
Or something.
Just Google that. We're gonna have Sherry back on much more often. Honestly, I think this is a very healthy thing we do, pairing our shows together, right? Sherry, over the years, by the way, is inched me ever closer to libertarianism, little L libertarianism, and even towards some anarcho-capitalist tinges or leanings, I suppose. And actually, Sherry, because you've been doing that with me, I've been doing that with my family. So as we take these like political survey tests online, and I send them around to my family group text, yeah, I can literally chart like seeing the rest of my family move along the line.
That's
Anyways,
awesome.
we got to end the show here for today. My name is Mr. Henry. Sherry Voluntary. Check out her stuff. We'll put some links on the Facebook stuff later on this afternoon. David Shine Thompson, all the Real News crew. Love having you this morning. We'll be back tomorrow doing it big. Signing off for today. Love you.